It has been a week. What is our response? That we did, of course, last week discuss the whole situation in Israel. And we looked historically at things in the past, things that had happened, and where Bob Trevor giving different guidance, various spiritual tools that we had used, and the enormous success we saw. And now it's a week later. So, of course, there's still a lot of pain, a tremendous amount of pain. There's, of course, also awareness of the miracles that were scattered through all that pain, and a greater and greater sense of our responsibility. So I wanted to overview some concepts very relevant to these times, trying not to touch on anything we discussed last week, with the foundational concepts that anyone that's tuned in, which I'm sure is everyone, and feeling what's going on, which I'm sure is everyone, to really things we have to keep very strongly, very aware of. First thing that we need to be aware of is that according to Torah, according to God, the land of Israel is the safest place in the world. It says in the verse, this is the land that the eyes of God are on from the beginning of the year until the end of the year. God is always, so to speak, directly watching and protecting the land of Israel. My husband, this was during the Gulf War of 1990, which of course had been building up for many months. And because of the Gulf War, in January of 1990, there was a plane that was chartered, primarily with students from Yeshiva University and other Orthodox universities that were going to spend a week in Israel, that first week of January, in solidarity with the Jews that are going to have their gas masks and going to be in their sealed rooms. So this plane load of people went. Tickets were like $50 or something. Someone sponsored the plane to go and show support for the Jews in Israel. And my husband managed to get a seat on that plane, and he flew there also. And when the plane came in, the reporters were there ready because all the other planes were leaving. No planes were going in. All the planes were going out. Again, this had been warned, and Saddam Hussein, and months and months and months was this buildup to January of 1990. So it was very clear that all planes were leaving and no planes were coming. So the reporters were asking everyone why they came, and people are explaining they came to show support for their brothers in this crisis, in this horrific situation, until they came to my husband. And my husband said, with his sense of humor and his very flawless Hebrew, he said, I live in America, live in Chicago, and it doesn't feel so safe. I didn't feel so safe. So I wanted to go to a place that would be safe. So that's why I came to Israel, because I know Israel is the safest place in the world. They love that. And as he was traveling that week, he was there for a week, and the buses were empty. It was usually him and the bus driver. He kept hearing that interview on the radio because it was such a message for the people to hear. Israel is the safest place in the world. My children flew back today. My son Naftali, who lives in Tzfat with his wife and his 3 young children. And of course, people said, like, are you scared? I'm like, Israel is the safest place. I know technically it might be a little challenging, the schools are closed, etc. Life might be a little, not normative, but Israel's the safest place in the world. That's what Torah says. That's the Torah reality. So this situation that we're in really creates for us the challenge, a personal challenge, not a challenge for anyone else, just very personally for each one of us. This challenge: is Torah creating my reality? Is God's words creating my reality, or not? If Torah determines my reality, it's simple. If the world determines my reality, then terrorists could impact my reality. Obviously, as the name implies, the goal of terrorists is to evoke terror. And we always have the choice, Torah, God, or nature. I could choose to let God determine my reality and know there's safety in Israel. Or I could choose to feel the fear, the terror, to give them a lot of power. That's why we said last week, don't watch the videos, don't look at the picture. They're designed to terrorize. But really to understand this a little more deeply than we went into last week, that really for each one of us, if we're going with God's word, we know Israel's safe. We know God runs the world. We know it's an untenable situation. We know it's an unfathomable situation. I keep telling God, I don't really have the solutions for you. I just know you can solve it, but you can solve it. And I know that. And I believe that. I have to keep reminding myself that that's the reality. That's the Torah reality. And I have to walk that road. And that's God's road. That's the road that creates victory because we're clinging to God, which really in essence means trusting in miracle. In all these situations in Israel in the past, as we discussed last week, the miracles were so obvious. And obviously there was miracles that we didn't know about. But obviously the 6-day war was like we said last week, was a miracle. And Entebbe was a miracle. And destroying that nuclear reactor in Iraq was a miracle. And the Yom Kippur War was a miracle. And the wars and conflicts in Israel have been miracle after miracle. The miracle that we know about and the miracle we don't know about. I mentioned before the Gulf War. After the Gulf War miraculously ended, Purim of 1990, Lubavitcher Rebbe wrote a letter to the Jewish people, and he wrote, greater than the miracles that we know are the miracles we don't know. And when the Rebbe wrote that, we didn't know what the Rebbe was talking about. The miracles that we don't know that happened with the Gulf War. Very recently, I'm not good with time, but I would say within the last 5 years, information was declassified, and we found out that Saddam Hussein had planes loaded with chemical warheads and biological warheads, planes aimed toward Israel. And he told them, he said, if anything happens to me, send the planes. If anything happens to Iraq, send the planes. Like, at least we should know we destroyed Israel. And those planes, they had tested some of these chemical and biological weapons, and where they dropped them, says the poison should last for 50 years. And that was in the plans for Israel. And very interesting when you look back at what happened in the war and all the lunges, all the mistakes that America made. And it's like, oh, wow, God was really protecting us. Because if anything happened to Saddam Hussein or to Iraq, those planes were flying to Israel. And then, inexplicably, for no reason, shortly before the war ended, Saddam gave the order and said, forget it. He didn't explain why. Take everything off the planes. Or not, change the plans. Well, I mean, he's the absolute dictator. Saddam says, fly the planes, we fly the planes. Saddam says, unload the planes, we unload them. So these planes with their deadly, deadly cargo was unloaded. Why? Because it says, the hearts of kings and officers are in the hand. So these miracles, so the Rebbe said, again, in 1990, that greater than the miracles that we know about are the miracles that are not yet known. And when that came out, when that information was declassified, and we found out about those planes that should have, could have, were meant to destroy completely every human in Israel and the land itself for 50 years, and then just didn't happen. Nobody then said, thank you, God, for it. We didn't know to say thank you. Well, we knew we said thank you for it. Greater than what we knew is what we didn't know was going on. That's been true in every conflict, and it's true now. And it's also true to really remember this point. The hearts of kings and officers are in the hands of God. We see now support from areas that traditionally never supported Israel or the Jewish people. We know the support could change in a minute. That's not what we're relying on at all. But the fact that we have it, even at this moment, is still miraculous. It's still the hand of God. Why is God doing this? I don't know, obviously. I don't know. But when we look and we get scared, and there's so many different things one could be scared of. What if America, ... What if the politicians in Israel, ... You know, there's so many different things you could be concerned over. You go back to the same verse. The hearts of the kings and officers are in the hands of God. In the end of the day, what God wants to happen will happen. And either person merits to be a good tool of God or the opposite. But what God wants to happen happens. So even if we're fearful over this person and for this organization and for this institution and for this leader and for these politics, and your head could get into many not healthy spaces. And then you remind yourself, the hearts of kings and officers are in the hand of God. And that's it. It's in God's hands. That's it. And as we said last week, but really to remind yourself, all of these enormous things that Israel won in the past were all impossible situations. The 6-Day War was impossible. The Yom Kippur War was impossible. And Entebbe was impossible. They were all impossible. We spoke about the nuclear reactor in 1981. How Lubavitcher Rebbe started a campaign, and Lubavitcher Rebbe clearly said, there's a madman in the world who wants to press a button and destroy the world. And we have to stop this madman. We have to stop this madman. And the Rebbe said how we're stopping him. Through writing these Torah scrolls and every person getting one letter, this is going to stop this madman. And the Rebbe pushed it until Shavuos of 1981. And on the eve of Shavuos of 1981 is when the Israelis flew and again, makes no sense, but did happen, destroyed enough of the nuclear reactor that Iraq had to stop the madmen in those plants. It's actually very interesting because the Rebbe then began, as I'm saying, this campaign of writing Torah scrolls to unite the Jewish people, with each person getting one and only one letter in the Torah scroll. Originally, they were only for children, for boys under bar mitzvah, under 13, and for girls under bat mitzvah, under 12. And again, this time in 1981, the Rebbe was pushing very strongly, this is going to protect the world. After that, the Rebbe globalized this to also be for adults as well. And there's definitely been this connection of this idea of the Torah scrolls and protecting the soldiers. So it's interesting now, this past week, my son Avremel generally goes every night to the airport to do this, to sign up people that are going to Israel to get letters in the Torah for themselves, for their children, for their grandchildren. Well, now the whole focus is to get soldiers to have letters in the Torah scroll. So it happens. So usually he's doing it. He's just doing his end. He doesn't know how the recipients feel as much. He's just trying on his end to help them. Happened last week that one of the recipients is a relative of mine. So I heard through the family grapevine from the relative to the relative of the relative that here was this girl. There's just this one very specific situation. She's 30 years old. She's a general in the Israeli army. She was flying to Israel, knowing what awaits her when she lands, understanding the intricacies and difficulties of the situation. And here's my son offers her a letter in a Torah scroll as a godly protection, as a godly shield. And when she purchased that letter, $1, when she purchased that letter, she said to her family, who conveyed it to my relative, who conveyed it to me, that she felt so touched. She felt so protected. She felt this is the best way to go to war. And it's just so strengthening when we know that we're doing things that are protecting soldiers and giving them the best way to go to war. Because I'm sure many of you might have seen that this week there's been a very, very big push prompted by soldiers asking to create tzitzis. As of course, many of the soldiers don't have tzitzis, but they feel it will bring them protection. It will save their lives. And children and retirees are just for hours making these tzitzit, making these tzitzis, these fringes for the soldiers to give them protection. And you could see so many little clips of soldiers getting the tzitzit and feeling so good and taken care of and loved and knowing they have this protection. Things we want to focus on, as I said, trust and joy. God is in control. When we found out the news, of course, it was on the holiday of Simchat Torah, Shmini Atzeret Simchat Torah. I merited to be, as I told you, in New York. And here, as I was in New York, I was in 770 in the Lubavitch World Headquarters, surrounded by Israelis. More likely you're Israeli than you're American if you were there. And that night, that Saturday night, I was standing for the hakafot, for the dancing, next to a girl from Sderot. Sderot is one of the 3 cities by the border of Gaza. On Sunday, near me was a woman who had 4 sons in the army. Next to me was a woman that had 1 son in the army. So these women and these girls that I was surrounded by, it was real. The situation was real. They weren't oblivious. They weren't not aware of what was going on. People were very aware. Right? We found out Saturday morning and we were very aware of what was going on. And the response, the collective response was, we have to add in joy. It's the holiday of Simchat Torah. The power is in dancing and joy. But this year we have to be more joyous. We have to add in joy. We have to add in dancing. We have to add in singing. That's our power. And that day, that Saturday, Shmini Atzeret, I did what I never did before. I stayed in the synagogue from the afternoon to the evening prayer, just dancing with people, just to add in the joy and add in the dancing. And of course, after the holiday, we heard in horrific detail the enormity of the tragedy, the enormity of the atrocities. But gradually over the week, we also got to hear some miracles. And as I heard these miracles, in my head, I went back to that joy and that dancing and that singing. And again, the joy from people who have close family, close relatives, close friends all over that area. And as I was thinking of how we danced and danced and danced, like we never danced. I'm there many years, never danced like we danced this year. We never sang like we sang this year. And as I hear of the different miracles that happened, I think back to that and I wonder, maybe our joy helped people all over the world. But each time as you put out energy, you're supposed to really believe and feel, maybe that was the energy. Obviously, all the miracles we hear don't compensate for the tragedy and atrocities. And I'm not at all saying they do. We have a very big demand to God. But we also have to be thankful for the good, though the bad is horrific. What were some of the miracles I've heard of that happened that day? Hamas came, they were targeting the festival. It wasn't an accident. And 3 cities very near them, and 22 moshavim and kibbutzim, 22 smaller settlements. They had a list of 22 settlements. They attacked 20 of the 22 settlements. 2 settlements they skipped. They didn't touch them at all. Only 2. Why? Because those 2 settlements were the only 2 settlements of this list that the settlement keeps the Shabbat, keeps the Shabbos. And as such, their gates were closed. And you could see the videos because they have footage from, I guess, their security cameras of the terrorists coming to the gates, like sort of looking, I don't know, it's sort of weird because they're like looking at the gates, coming up to the gates, and then they literally just turn around and leave. And it's like the weirdest thing. I mean, these people, they couldn't figure out how to get over a gate, but it was like, okay. I'm sure many of you might have heard the story vaguely. I listened to the woman actually saying over her whole story of this very, very brave woman. Her name is Rachel, and her husband, who were held hostage in their home by 5 terrorists for 20 hours. And for 20 hours, she's keeping her presence of mind, talking to them, feeding them, offering them food, offering them cookies, offering to massage, just keeping them from getting trigger happy for 20 hours until somehow miraculously the soldiers were able to shoot them without them shooting her and her husband. It makes no sense. I mean, literally, she and her husband were in the middle. By this point, one of the 5 had been killed. There were 4 terrorists, all of them pointing their guns and ammunition and bombs at her head and her husband. And after 20 hours, the soldiers managed to kill the 4, and she and her husband survived. It doesn't make any sense, but it did happen. And it was just amazing strength of her character, an amazing miracle of God. There was a group of soldiers in Eilat, where strength sets. Eilat is the furthest southern port of Israel. They heard what happened, that did many people, and they immediately jumped into, there's a group of soldiers, a station of soldiers. They jumped in the Jeep and they just drove. They drove for 3 hours. They got to one settlement. Why they picked that one? Hand of God. It was the one they came to. And they managed to kill out or cause to run away all of the terrorists that were there. 2 people were killed in the settlement before they got there. But again, how only 2 people were killed compared to what the terrorists were doing everywhere else? How these soldiers routed the terrorists? It took them 3 hours to get there. How the terrorists didn't massacre the people during these 3 hours. None of it makes sense, but it did happen. And again, it was just another miracle created by somewhere in the world, people turning to God and God responding. Many other things like that, many stories coming out. It would take a long time to give over a lot of this, and you listen to it, is only in Hebrew, I imagine. So, or when you're hearing the first person accounting, these are Israelis talking, but crazy things. A grandfather who lived in Tel Aviv got a text from his son, "They're terrorists in my house." He said, "I'm coming to save you." He and his wife drive down. I can't tell you all the details. It would take like 20 minutes. Makes no sense. There was no way he could even get to that settlement. Like, there were so many roadblocks and terrorists and wounded people and people running from the festival. And he dealt with it all. And in the end, he got there. And he immediately took control of the soldiers that were trying to free this settlement. He said, "I know the settlement. My son lives here." He didn't tell them I just traveled from Tel Aviv to get here. He split the soldiers up. He got half of them to attack the terrorists in one place. He and the other soldiers went house to house, routing out and saving the people. And he got to the house of his son. He saved his son. He saved his grandchildren. And he saved the whole settlement from these terrorists. He did it. Doesn't make sense, but he did it. And many other stories of people that, again, did things that make no sense, did things that were impossible. Single people that killed 10, 20, 30 terrorists. It was a family that managed to hold off the terrorists were going in their settlements, and they managed to barricade them in themselves in a room. And again, many, many, many details, but managed to save their whole family from these terrorists. People that ran from the festival and ran for a few hours and saved themselves. Again, more stories and more stories and more stories, but none of that's an excuse. None of that says, "God, we're happy with what happened." We're not. It's horrific. It is horrific. The situation is still horrific. And at the same time, every time as I hear another story and another miracle and another person, one person, two people, three people, another person that was somehow, hand of God, saved, it's like, okay, maybe that was created by our joy. Maybe that was created by our dancing. Maybe that was created by our singing. Because I know we tried really, really, really hard. And I know what you do, what you put out, makes a difference. And I'm sharing this because that's what we have to stay focused on now. That what we do does make a difference. And there's miracles happening now. And there's lots of miracles we need to happen now. And what we do makes a difference. The Torah portion of last week's Sunday was the entire Torah portion of the final Torah portion, Zot HaBracha, which discusses the safety and security of Israel. And the very beginning, we start over the Torah book of Bereshit, of Genesis, where we read about creation. And the sages say, why does God start with creation? Torah is about the commandments. God should start by giving us the commandments. He doesn't give us the commandments until like book 2. The entire book 1 is in commandments. Why do we start with creation? Torah's not a history book. And the sages say, because there'll come a time when the nations will say, "You are robbers that you took this land of Israel from us." And we will respond, no, look in the Bible. In the Bible, it says, God created the world. This whole world is his. The land of Israel is his. And God in the Bible is saying he's giving the land of Israel to Jewish people. We're not robbers. It's God's land, and he's giving it to us. And this was the Torah portion of Sunday. And it was just such a powerful, powerful, timely message. Living with the times, live with the Torah portion. This week's Torah portion is Noach. Noach is where we see the word Hamas in the Torah several times, which means violence, robbery. We discuss how the world is full of Hamas, how the world is full of this violence, how the world is full of this robbery. And because of that, God washes away that world. God washes away that evil with the greatest destruction that ever happened to mankind. This week's Torah portion, the greatest cleansing that ever happened to mankind, a flood that washed away all the Hamas, all the violence that had taken over the world. That's this week's Torah portion. And last week's Torah portion, this land is God's. God took the land of Israel and gave it to the Jewish people. It's our land. So you could say, okay, it's a coincidence or it's more than a coincidence, but who cares? We care because Torah creates reality. That was our starting point. Reality comes from Torah. So if this was or wasn't this week's Torah portion, it's still the same truth. But we're told to live with the times. What does it mean, live with the times? The shoes you wear, the clothing you wear. Living with the times means live with the Torah portion. It's true all year round, but when it's that week's Torah portion, its energy is especially dominant. So the whole energy of last week was the land of Israel is the land of the Jewish people. God created the world and God gave Israel to the Jews. We're not robbers. It's our land. And God wrote the Torah this way so we should be able to show the world. This world is God's. He gave us this land. It's ours. And now we're in the week when we wash away the Hamas, when we wash away the violence, the robbery. That's according to Torah, what Hamas says. It's violence and specifically robbery. We wash it away with the great flood that washed, removed, and cleansed the world. That's the energy of now. In the last time we heard from the Lubavitcher Rebbe in the Torah Parsha week of Bereshis, meaning this would have been this past Shabbos, the Rebbe said these messages very, very strongly. This was in the fall of 1991. And the Rebbe said, this now is a time of redemption. And we have to really intensify the recognition in the entire world of the quality of the Jewish people, of the praise of the Jewish people. The whole world has to understand this concept. But I was just saying, the first word of the Torah is Bereshis, which people erroneously translate as in the beginning, right? First verse of the entire Torah, entire Bible. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Except guess what? That's not what the words mean. The words don't mean in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. That would be a different Hebrew word. Then the Hebrew word wouldn't be Bereshis, it would be Bereshona. But it's Bereshis. What does Bereshis mean? For the sake of first, God created heaven and earth. What are the first? Bereshis. For the sake of two firsts. The first called the Jewish people, the first called Torah. Bereshis. For the first. For the sake of the Jewish people, God created heaven and earth. The Rebbe says, the whole world has to recognize this. The whole world will recognize this. The whole world will recognize that the land of Israel is a possession of the Jewish people. This will be completely revealed, that there should be now the revelation of the wonders of God. It says, as we left Egypt, I will show you wonders, meaning the wonders of redemption that will blow away the wonders of the Exodus from Egypt. The Rebbe said that's what needs to happen now. That degree of wonders, which is what we're waiting for and which we are creating. And to understand that we're all fighters in this war. And this is, of course, the message that we want to understand and the message we spoke about last week. And I wanted to reiterate, because this is the most important message, is that we're all fighters. We're all in different brigades. We're all in different divisions. There's the physical army, there's the spiritual army. From the strength of the spiritual army is the power of the physical army. This goes all the way back to King David. Our sages say that David sat, prayed, composed psalms, studied Torah, and he had a general, Yoav. He went out to war and he was victorious. But we credit all of Yoav's, the general's victories, to David. Because David's Torah study, David's prayers, David's relationship with God, that created Yoav's victories on the battlefield. We all need to be that David. It's very, very important for each one of us to internalize this message and for each one of us to share this message. Please give this message to whoever you can. Be true for every Jew, be true for any non-Jew. We need to be the David. We need to be the spiritual army. We want to join the forces, be part of that spiritual army that is empowering the physical army. So many things we've seen over the years and over the wars that the Lubavitcher Rebbe has emphasized, and that we can grab other things as well. But tefillin, anyone you can inspire to put on tefillin in these days, once or every day besides Saturday. The Rebbe said again and again, this is what won the 6-Day War. But all the wars, the Rebbe kept going back to tefillin. There's a verse that says that they will see that God's name is on you and they will fear you. As they just say, these are the tefillin, the phylacteries of the head. When the Jewish man is wearing these tefillin on his head, they will fear us. They will run from us. We saw this tangibly by the 6-Day War. But in all the conflicts, the Rebbe always went back to the idea of tefillin as protecting the soldiers of Israel. You could be an enlister, recruit officer in the spiritual army. Get other people to put on tefillin, the phylacteries, mezuzahs. The Rebbe spoke about mezuzah very strongly by Entebbe and after Entebbe. Not only then, when any Jew in the world puts on a mezuzah, it protects Jews all over the world. My son flew today to Israel, and someone from Chicago gave him a whole stack of mezuzah scrolls to bring to Israel, to put on the doors of people in Israel that don't have kosher mezuzahs. You could be in Chicago or New York or California, wherever you are, you're checking your mezuzahs to make sure they're kosher, putting on mezuzahs if you don't have, getting other people who don't have to put on mezuzahs. Unfortunately, there's 2 women from Evanston that are from the hostages. Thank God. The mezuzahs of the woman's home was checked. One of them was not kosher and was fixed. Her daughter, her parents are divorced, is very often in her father's home in Deerfield that has no mezuzahs. Kosher mezuzahs were put on every door of that home. But it's for any Jew and every Jew. All of us can add mezuzahs, check ours, make sure we have on all our doorposts. If we don't, put where we don't have. Or if you know someone else that doesn't have a mezuzah, or you don't have a kosher mezuzah, be a recruitment officer. Get someone else to join the army. Convince someone to put up a mezuzah and explain to them, you're putting up the mezuzah. It's protecting the Jews all over the world. Charity. It says charity saves from death. Jewish women lighting Shabbos candles. So many people this past Shabbos lit candles that never lit before. There's a very poignant audio going around in Hebrew, an Israeli woman asking for someone to give her Shabbat candles and saying she never lit in her life. She doesn't know what to do. She doesn't know how to light. She doesn't know the prayer. She knows nothing. But she wants to light the Shabbat candles. I reached out to people that generally never light. They lit. You know, you could light a candle and help. Well, jewelry, you're going to light that. People kept this Shabbos. Many people kept the Shabbos or kept partially the Shabbos, however much they could. They kept the Shabbos that they never did before. Can't even imagine what miracles are being created by all of that. Inspire people. The tefillin, the mezuzah, charity, lighting the Shabbos candles, keeping Shabbos, adding in prayers. There's so many parts of our prayers that we ask God to destroy the enemy. Adding in Psalms through all the conflicts. We always emphasize Psalms. Chapter 20, 22, 69, 122, 123, 150, 81 through 90. Whatever you can do. Do it yourself. Get other people to do it. Charity could be a small amount just to give every day. It says charity saves from deaths. The miracles are happening and we need these miracles to happen. One day this week, a friend of my son who's in the army, so he was recruited and he was sent to this area where the terrorists had been, like by Gaza. And they split the soldiers into 2 groups. The groups that were looking for terrorists and the groups that were looking for bodies. And my son's friend was in one of the many groups that were looking for bodies. He was with 4 other soldiers. So the 5 of them are going to this area with this very sad, horrible task of looking for bodies. And as they're looking for bodies, a group of terrorists who were hiding found them and started shooting at them. And my son's friend said he thought he wasn't going to make it. Like he knew he wasn't going to make it. Like, you know, this is a group of terrorists. I mean, they weren't armed to look for terrorists. They were looking for bodies. They were shooting and shooting and shooting. He was sure that was it. One of them got there. I mean, of course, they're shooting back, but still. They were outnumbered and outgunned, and then God made a miracle. And a group of Israelis looking for terrorists found them, heard the conflict, found them, and saved them. And all 5 of them were saved. 3 of them were wounded, 1 rather seriously, but they all 5 survived. That was a miracle. What created that miracle? Who knows what created that miracle? Who knows whose psalms, charity, mezuzahs, tefillin, prayers, maybe many, many, many people's, maybe one person's. Anyone tried to reach out to anyone and get them to do more, or themselves that they added and felt the difference that they were doing?
It was okay. We always do at the same time.
Okay, let's hear Rachel, let's hear Menucha.
I was at my son's place today. Brought home his daughter, my granddaughter. We talked about that. He doesn't absorb all the way. They absorb something, but not fully. And I told him, do you see that God gives us messages? God wants us to do more. And he was like, yes, I feel it. I feel it. So I hope that he will do more, maybe fully absorbing Shabbos, which they partially absorb. My daughter-in-law always has candles and all that. Partial kosher, partial kashrut, but not fully. So today we had this conversation. It's like we had these feelings, the things that you talk about, that we need to do more.
Okay, well, you keep giving the message, because the heart of the Jew is alive and awake and sensitive. And sometimes we need one push, and sometimes we need another push, and sometimes we need another push. And then you just keep sincerely, with love, with say truthful words from your heart, and drop by drop.
He was always saying before that he's comfortable at the level they're at. But today it sounded different.
I heard from my son that a number of boys he knows that unfortunately stopped keeping the Shabbos this past week, kept the Shabbos in honor of what was going on in Israel. And that 2 of the boys after Shabbos said it felt so good to keep the Shabbos, they're going to keep keeping it. So the heart of the Jew is awake, the heart of the Jew is open, and we have to keep trying. And maybe you speak to someone and they say no. You speak to them again, you never know when they're going to say yes, because it's the heart of a Jewish person. I think every Jew feels and wants. I'm saying there was this I heard this woman in Israel talking. She's in Israel, and she's saying she has no clue how to light the Shabbat candle. She has no equipment. She doesn't know what you say. She doesn't know the prayer. She knows nothing about it. Can someone please help her? Or someone was telling me about a friend of his, not religious, and he was saying, before the Shabbat, it's like he'd like to maybe go to Chabad, but he doesn't know. Like, could he go? Would they accept him? Would they welcome him? Like, what would he do there? And so many people responded to him. So much as people responded to him to say, yes, go. This is how you can help. Menucha, what were you going to add?
Last Shabbat, I invited 3 families who never celebrated Shabbat with the prayers and hand washing. It was very special. All the men kept the kippah on through Shabbat. So they did all the prayers, wine, challah, washing hands. We prayed, we read psalms together, we sang songs, and we had meaningful conversations, and it was amazing. All we talked about the victory was very positive, not like random conversations about vacations, cars, but was very special.
So God willing, you'll invite more people this week for even more celebratory.
That's the plan.
That's the plan. That's beautiful. I like what Rachel said. I like what Menucha said, because it's practical. So Rachel's saying she's reaching out to her children. And she's tried before and they haven't listened, but she's trying now, and maybe they're a little more hearing it. And Menucha's saying she's reaching out to her friends. And she's making very pleasant and very positive. I'm sure there's lots of good food that she made. She didn't mention. Made sure, good food, good wine. and very positive, and Shabbat. So beautiful. So we're soldiers and we're recruiters. And each one of us should really find how you can be the soldier. There's the videos of girls really taking scissors and cutting up not modest clothing. As they're cutting the clothing, they're saying, this is for the soldier, this is for the soldiers, this is for the soldiers. People doing things they never would have done before. I asked someone to light the candles. She never will light the candles. She said she lit, she's gonna do it to protect Jewish people. She's gonna do it. So people are doing things they wouldn't have done before, and God sees that. People are united in a way they unfortunately have not been united. God sees that. So the spiritual arsenal is there. So the great miracles, I was very disappointed Saturday night, because of course I didn't hear anything over the whole Saturday. Like, come on, God, look what you got. There's so much spiritual arsenal out there. What's going on? But okay, we got to do more. We've got to be such good troops, doing so much that everything else just happens like on its own, because there's so much spiritual arsenal. So be a soldier and be a recruiter and get more people to join the brigades, because that's how we create God's victories. That's how we partner with him, for him to make the victories that the whole world will see. It's him.